Good evening, and welcome to tonight's edition of Quarantine Theater, presented by Liberty Center Association for the Arts. Tonight's presentation is The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. Enjoy the show.
Did you hear what I was playing, Lane?
I didn't think it polite to listen, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry for that. For your sake. I don't play accurately. Anyone can play accurately, but I do play with wonderful expression.
Yes, sir.
Have you got the cucumber sandwiches cut up for Lady Bracknell?
Yes, sir.
That will do, Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ernest Worthing.
How are you, my dear Ernest? What brings you up to town?
Oh, pleasure. What else should bring anyone anywhere? Eating as usual, I see, Algie.
I believe it is customary in good society to take some slight refreshment at 5 o'clock. Where have you been since last Thursday?
In the country. Hello? Why all these cups? Why cucumber sandwiches? Why such reckless extravagance in one so young? Who's coming to tea?
Oh, merely Aunt Augusta and Gwendolen.
How perfectly delightful.
Yes, that is all very well, but I'm afraid Aunt Augusta won't quite approve of your being here.
May I ask why?
My dear fellow, the way you flirt with Gwendolen is perfectly disgraceful. It's almost as bad as the way Gwendolen flirts with you.
I am in love with Gwendolen. I have come up to town expressly to propose to her.
I thought you'd come up for pleasure. I call that business.
How utterly unromantic you are.
I really don't see anything romantic in proposing. The very essence of romance is uncertainty. If ever I get married, I'll be certain to forget that.
I have no doubt about that, dear Algie. The divorce court was specifically invented for people whose memories are so curiously constituted.
Divorces are made in heaven. Oh, please don't touch the cucumber sandwiches. They were ordered specially for Aunt Augusta.
Well, you have been eating them all this time.
Well, that is quite a different matter. She's my aunt. You know, I don't think you will ever marry Gwendolen.
Why on earth do you say that?
Well, in the first place, girls never marry the men they flirt with. Girls don't think it right.
Oh, that's nonsense.
It isn't. It's a great truth. It accounts for the extraordinary number of bachelors one sees all over the place. In the second place, I don't give my consent.
Your consent?
My dear fellow, Gwendolen is my first cousin. And before I allow you to marry her, you will have to clear up the whole question of Cecily.
Cecily? What on earth do you mean? What do you mean, Algie, by Cecily? I don't know anyone by the name of Cecily.
Lane, bring me that cigarette case that Mr. Worthing left in the smoking room the last time he was dining here.
Yes, sir.
Do you mean to say you have had my cigarette case all this time?
Oh, well, however, it makes no matter, for now that I look at it, the inscription inside, I find that it isn't yours after all.
Of course it's mine. You've seen me with it 100 times, and you have no right whatsoever to read what is written inside. It is a very ungentlemanly thing to read a private cigarette case.
Yes, but it isn't your cigarette case. This cigarette case was a present from someone of the name Cecily, and you said you didn't know anyone of that name.
Well, if you have to know, Cecily happens to be my aunt.
Your aunt?
Yes, just give it back to me, Algie.
But why does your aunt call you her uncle? From little Cecily, with her fondest love for her dear Uncle Jack. Why an aunt should call her own nephew or uncle, I can't quite make out. Besides, your name isn't Jack, it's Ernest.
It isn't Ernest, it's Jack.
You've always told me it was Ernest. You answer to the name of Ernest. You look as if your name was Ernest. You're the most earnest-looking person I ever saw in my life. It's perfectly absurd you're saying your name isn't Ernest. It's on your cards. Here's one of them. Mr. Ernest Worthing, B4, the Albany. I'll keep this as proof that your name is Ernest if ever you attempt to deny it to me, or to Gwendolen, or to anyone for that matter.
Well, my name is Ernest in town and Jack in the country. And cigarette case was given to me in the country.
Yes, but that does not account for the fact that your small Aunt Cecily calls you her dear uncle. Come, old boy, you'd much better have the thing out at once.
My dear Algie, you talk exactly as if you were a dentist. It's very vulgar to talk like a dentist when one isn't a dentist. It produces a false impression.
Well, that is exactly what dentists always do. Now go on, tell the whole thing, and may I mention that I have always suspected you of being a confirmed and secret Bunburyist, and I am quite sure of it now.
Bunburyist? What on earth do you mean by a Bunburyist?
I'll reveal to you the meaning of that incomparable expression as soon as you are good enough to inform me why you are Ernest in town and Jack in the country. Now produce your explanation, and pray make it probable. Improbable.
My dear fellow, there's nothing improbable about my explanation at all. In fact, it is perfectly ordinary. Old Mr. Thomas Cardew, who adopted me when I was a little boy, made me in his will guardian to his granddaughter, Miss Cecily Cardew. Cecily, who addresses me as uncle from motives of respect that you could not possibly appreciate, lives at my place in the country under the charge of her admirable governess, Miss Prism.
And where is that place in the country, by the way?
That is nothing to you, dear boy. You are not going to be invited.
Now go on. Why are you Ernest in town and Jack in the country?
My dear Algie, I don't know whether you will be able to understand my real motives. When one is placed in the position of guardian, one has to adopt a very high moral tone on all subjects. And as a high moral tone can hardly be said to conduce very much to either one's health or one's happiness, in order to get up to town, I've always pretended to have a younger brother by the name of Ernest, who lives in the Albany and who gets into the most dreadful scrapes. That, my dear Algie, is the whole truth, pure and simple.
The truth is rarely pure and never simple. What you really are is a Bunburyist. I was quite right in saying you are a Bunburyist. You are one of the most advanced Bunburyists I know.
What on earth do you mean?
Well, you have invented a very useful younger brother called Ernest in order that you may be able to come up to town as often as you like. I have invented an invaluable permanent invalid named Bunbury in order that I may be able to go down to the country whenever I choose. Bunbury is perfectly invaluable. If it wasn't for Bunbury's extraordinary bad health, for instance, I wouldn't be able to dine with you tonight at Willis's, for I've really been engaged to dine with Aunt Augusta for more than a week.
I haven't asked you to dine anywhere with me tonight.
I know. You're absurdly careless about sending an invitation. It's very foolish of you. Nothing annoys people quite as much as not receiving invitations.
You had better dine with your Aunt Augusta.
I haven't the smallest intention of doing anything of the kind. To begin with, I dine there on Monday, and once a week is quite enough to dine with one's own relations. Besides, now that I know you are a confirmed Bunburyist, I naturally want to talk to you about Bunbury. I want to tell you the rules.
I'm not a Bunburyist at all. If Gwendolen accepts me, I'm going to kill my brother. Indeed, I think I'll kill him in any case. Cecily is a little too much interested in him. It's rather a bore. So I'm going to get rid of Ernest, and I strongly advise you do the same with your invalid friend with the absurd name.
Nothing will induce me to part with Bunbury, and if ever you get married, which seems slightly problematic, you will be glad to know Bunbury. A man who marries without knowing Bunbury has a very tedious time of it.
That is nonsense. If I marry a charming girl like Gwendolen, and she is the only girl I ever saw in my life that I would marry, I certainly wouldn't want to know Bunbury.
Then your wife will. You don't seem to realize that in married life, 3 is company and 2 is none. Oh, that must be Aunt Augusta. Now, if I can get her out of the way for 10 minutes or so that you have an opportunity to propose to Gwendolen, may I dine with you tonight at Willis's?
I suppose so, if you want to.
Yes, but do be serious about it. I hate people who are not serious about meals. It's so shallow of them.
Lady Bracknell and Miss Fairfax.
Good afternoon, dear Algernon. I hope you are behaving very well.
I'm feeling very well, Aunt Augusta.
That's not quite the same thing. In fact, The two things rarely go together.
You're quite perfect, Miss Fairfax.
Oh, I hope I am not that. It would leave no room for developments, and I intend to develop in many directions.
I'm sorry if we are a little late, Algernon. And now I'll have a cup of tea and one of those nice cucumber sandwiches you promised me.
Certainly, Aunt Augusta. Good heavens, Lane! Why are there no cucumber sandwiches? I ordered them specially.
There were no cucumbers in the market this morning, sir. I went down twice.
No cucumbers?
No, sir, not for any money.
That will do, Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I am greatly distressed, Aunt Augusta, about there being no cucumbers, not even for ready money.
It really makes no matter, Algernon. I've quite a treat for you tonight, Algernon.
I'm afraid, Aunt Augusta, I shall have to give up the pleasure of dining with you tonight, after all.
Oh, I hope not, Algernon.
It is a great bore, and I need hardly say a terrible disappointment to me, but the fact is I just had a telegram to say my poor friend Bunbury is very ill again. They seem to think I should be with him.
It is very strange. This Mr. Bunbury seems to suffer from curiously bad health.
Yes, poor Bunbury is a dreadful invalid.
Well, I must say, Algernon, that I think it is high time Mr. Bunbury made up his mind whether he was to live or to die. This shilly-shallying with the question is absurd. I should be obliged if you would ask Mr. Bunbury from me to be kind enough not to have a relapse on Saturday, for I depend upon you to do the music for me.
I'll speak to Bunbury, Aunt Augusta, if he's still conscious. And I think I can promise you he'll be all right by Saturday. But I'll run over the program I've drawn out, if you'll kindly come with me into the next room for a moment.
Thank you, Algernon. It is very thoughtful of you.
Charming day it has been, Miss Fairfax. I would like to be allowed to take advantage of Lady Bracknell's temporary absence.
Oh, I would certainly advise you to do so. Mamma has a way of coming back suddenly into a room that I have often had to speak to her about.
Miss Fairfax, ever since I met you, I have admired you more than any girl I have ever met since I met you.
Yes, I am quite well aware of that fact. For me, you have always had an irresistible fascination. Even before I met you, I was far from indifferent to you. We live, as I hope you know, Mr. Worthing, in an age of ideals. And my ideal has always been to love someone of the name of Earnest. There is something in that name that inspires absolute confidence. The moment Algernon first mentioned to me that he had a friend called Ernest, I knew I was destined to love you.
You really love me, Gwendolen.
Passionately.
You don't know how happy you've made me.
My own Ernest.
But you really don't mean to say that you couldn't love me if my name wasn't Ernest.
But your name is Ernest.
Yes, I know it is, but supposing it was something else. Do you mean to say you couldn't love me then? Personally, darling, to speak quite candidly, I don't much care for the name of Ernest. I don't think the name suits me at all.
Oh, it suits you perfectly. It is a divine name. It has a music of its own. It produces vibrations.
Well, really, Gwendolen, I must say, I think there are lots of other much nicer names. I think Jack, for instance, a charming name.
Jack? No, there is very little music in the name Jack. I have known several Jacks, and they all, without exception, were more than unusually plain. The only really safe name is Earnest.
Gwendolen, I must get christened at once. But I mean, we must get married at once. There is no time to be lost.
Married, Mr. Worthing?
Well, surely. You know that I love you, and you led me to believe, Miss Fairfax, that you were not absolutely indifferent to me.
I adore you, but you haven't proposed to me yet. Nothing has been said at all about marriage. The subject hasn't even been touched upon.
Well, may I propose to you now?
I think it would be an admirable opportunity. And to spare you any possible disappointment, Mr. Worthing, I think it is only fair to tell you quite frankly beforehand that I am fully determined to accept you.
Gwendolen,
Yes, Mr. Worthing, what have you got to say to me?
you know what I have got to say to you.
Yes, but you don't say it.
Oh, Gwendolen, will you marry me?
Of course I will, darling. How long you have been about it. I'm afraid you have had very little experience in how to propose.
My own one, I have never loved anyone in the world but you.
Mr. Worthing!
Oh, Mamma, I must beg you to retire. This is no place for you. Besides, Mr. Worthing has not quite finished yet.
Finished what, may I ask?
I am engaged to be married to Mr. Worthing, Mamma.
Pardon me, you are not engaged to anyone. When you do become engaged to someone, I will inform you of the fact. An engagement should come to a young girl as a surprise, pleasant or unpleasant as the case may be. It is hardly a matter that she should be allowed to arrange for herself. Gwendolen, you will wait for me below in the carriage.
Mamma!
In the carriage, Gwendolen. And now I have a few questions to put to you, Mr. Worthing. How old are you?
29.
A very good age to be married at. I have always been of the opinion that a man who desires to get married should either know everything or nothing. Which do you know?
I know nothing, Lady Bracknell.
I am pleased to hear it. What is your income?
Between 7,000 and 8,000 a year. I have a country house with some land, of course, attached to it, about 1,500 acres, I believe. But I don't depend on that for my real income. In fact, as far as I can make out, the poachers are the only people making anything out of it.
A country house. A girl with a simple, unspoiled nature like Gwendolen could hardly be expected to reside in the country. Now to more minor matters. Are your parents living?
I have lost both my parents.
To lose one parent, Mr. Worthing, may be regarded as misfortune. To lose both looks like carelessness. Who was your father? He was evidently a man of some wealth.
I'm afraid I really don't know. The fact is, Lady Bracknell, I said I had lost my parents. It would be nearer the truth to say that my parents seem to have lost me. I don't actually know who I am by birth. I was found.
Found?
The late Mr. Thomas Cardew, an old gentleman of very charitable and kindly disposition, found me and gave me the name of Worthing because he happened to have a first-class ticket to Worthing in his pocket at the time. Worthing is a place in Sussex. It is a seaside resort.
Where did the charitable gentleman who had the first-class ticket for this seaside resort find you?
In a handbag.
A handbag?
Yes, Lady Bracknell, I was in a handbag, a somewhat large black leather handbag with handles to it, an ordinary handbag, in fact.
In what locality did this Mr. Thomas Cardew come across this ordinary handbag?
In the cloakroom at Victoria Station. It was given to him in mistake for his own.
The cloakroom at Victoria Station? Mr. Worthing, I confess I feel somewhat bewildered by what you have just told me. To be born, or at any rate bred in a handbag, whether it had handles or not, seems to me to display a contempt for the ordinary decencies of family life.
May I ask you then what you would advise me to do? I need hardly say I would do anything in the world to ensure Gwendolen's happiness?
I would strongly advise you, Mr. Worthing, to try to make a definite effort to produce at least one parent of either sex.
Well, I don't see how I could possibly manage to do that. I could produce the handbag at any moment. It is in my dressing room at home. I really think that should satisfy you, Lady Bracknell.
Me, sir? What has it to do with me? You can hardly imagine that I would dream of allowing my only daughter, a girl brought up with the utmost care, to marry into a cloakroom and form an alliance with a parcel. Good day, Mr. Worthing.
Good day.
Didn't it go all right, old boy? You don't mean to say Gwendolen refused you? I know it's a way she has. She's always refusing people.
Oh, Gwendolen is right as a trivet. As far as she is concerned, we are engaged. Her mother is perfectly unbearable. Lady Bracknell is a monster without being a myth, which is quite unfair. I beg your pardon, Algy. I suppose I shouldn't talk about your own aunt in that way before you.
My dear boy, I love hearing my relations abused. It's the only thing that makes me put up with them at all. Relations are such tedious people, and who haven't got the remotest knowledge of how to live, nor the smallest instinct on when to die.
You don't think there's any chance of Gwendolen becoming like her mother in about 150 years, do you?
All women become like their mothers. That is their tragedy. No man does. That's his. By the way, did you tell Gwendolen the truth about you being Ernest in town and Jack in the country?
My dear fellow, the truth isn't quite the sort of thing that one tells to a nice, sweet, refined girl. What extraordinary ideas you have about the way to behave to a woman.
The only way to behave to a woman is to make love to her if she is pretty, and someone else if she's plain.
Oh, that is nonsense.
What about your brother? What about the profligate Earnest?
Oh, before the end of the week, I shall have got rid of him. I'll say he died in Paris of a stroke. Lots of people die of strokes quite suddenly, don't they?
Yes, but it's hereditary, my dear fellow. It's a sort of thing that runs in families. You had much better say a severe chill.
You are sure a severe chill isn't hereditary or anything of that kind?
Of course it isn't.
Very well, then. My poor brother Ernest is carried off suddenly in Paris by a severe chill. That gets rid of him.
But I thought you said that Miss Cardew was a little too much interested in your poor brother Ernest. Won't she feel his loss a good deal?
Oh, that is all right. Cecily's not a silly, romantic girl, I'm glad to say.
I would rather like to see Cecily.
I will take very good care that you never do. She's excessively pretty, and she is only just 18.
Have you told Gwendolen yet about your excessively pretty ward who is only just 18?
Oh, one doesn't just blurt these things out to people. Cecily and Gwendolen are perfectly certain to be extremely good friends. I'll bet you anything that within a half an hour after they've met, they will be calling each other sister.
Women only do that when they've called each other a lot of other things first.
Miss Fairfax.
Gwendolen, upon my word.
Algy, kindly turn your back. I have something very particular to say to Mr. Worthing.
Really, Gwendolen, I really don't think I can allow this at all.
My own darling.
Ernest, we may never be married. From the expression on Mamma's face, I fear we never shall. But although she may prevent us from becoming man and wife, and I may marry someone else and marry often, nothing that she can possibly do can alter my eternal devotion to you. The story of your romantic origin, as related to me by Mamma, has naturally stirred the deeper fibers of my nature. Your Christian name has an irresistible fascination for me. Your town address at the Albany I have. What is your address in the country?
The Manor House, Woolton, Hertfordshire.
It may be necessary to do something desperate. I will communicate with you daily. Algy, you may turn round now.
I'll see you now to your carriage, my own dear one.
Tomorrow, Lane, I'm going Bunburying.
Yes, sir.
I shall probably not be back till Monday. You can put up my dress clothes, my smoking jacket, and all of the Bunbury suits.
Yes, sir.
I hope tomorrow will be a fine day, Lane.
It never is, sir.
Lane, you're a perfect pessimist.
I do my best to give satisfaction, sir.
Oh, now there's a sensible, intelligent girl, the only girl I ever cared for in my life. Now, what on earth are you so amused at?
Oh, I'm just a little anxious about poor Bunbury, that's all.
If you don't take care, your friend Bunbury will get you into a serious scrape someday.
I love scrapes. They're the only thing that are never serious.
Well, that is nonsense, Algie. You never talk anything but nonsense.
Nobody ever does.
Cecily, Cecily, intellectual endeavors are calling. So they call your name. Your German grammar is on the table. Pray open to page 15. And let's review your lesson from yesterday.
But I don't like German.
Child, you know how anxious your guardian is that you should improve yourself in every way. He laid particular stress on your German.
Dear Uncle Jack is so very serious. Sometimes he is so serious that I think he cannot be quite well.
Your guardian enjoys the best of health. He has the utmost duty and responsibility.
I suppose that is why he often looks a little bored when we three are together.
Cecily, I'm surprised at you. Mr. Worthing has many troubles in his life. You must remember his constant anxiety about his younger brother, Ernest.
I wish Uncle Jack would allow that unfortunate young man, his brother, to come down here sometimes. We might have a good influence over him, Miss Prism. I am sure you certainly would.
I do not think that even I could produce any effect on character according to his own brother's admission is irretrievably weak and vacillating. Indeed, I am not sure that I would desire to reclaim him. I am not in favor of this modern mania for turning bad people into good people at a moment's notice. As a man sows, so shall he reap. You must put away your diary, Cecily. I do not know why you keep one at all.
I keep a diary in order to enter the wonderful secrets of my life. If I didn't write them down, I should probably forget about them all.
Memory, my dear Cecily, is the diary that we all carry around with us.
Yes, but it usually chronicles the things that have never happened and couldn't possibly have happened. I believe that memory is responsible for nearly all 3-volume novels.
Do not speak slightingly of the 3-volume novel, Cecily. I wrote one myself in my earlier days.
Did you really, Miss Prism? How wonderfully clever you are. I hope it did not end happily. I don't like novels that end happily. They depress me so much.
The good ended happily and the bad unhappily. That is what fiction means.
I suppose so, but seems very unfair. And was your novel ever published?
Oh, alas, no. The manuscript was abandoned. I use that word for the sense of lost or mislaid. To your work now, Cecily. These speculations are profitless.
But I see dear Dr. Chasuble coming up through the garden.
Ooh, Dr. Chasuble, this is indeed a pleasure.
And how are we this morning, Miss Prism? You are, I trust, well.
Miss Prism has just been complaining of a slight headache. I think it would do her so much good to have a short stroll with you in the park, Dr. Chasuble.
Cecily, I have not mentioned anything about a headache.
No, dear Miss Prism, I know that, but I felt instinctively that you had a headache. Indeed, I was thinking about it and not about my German lesson when the rector came in.
No, I hope, Cecily, you are not inattentive.
Oh, I am afraid I am.
Well, that is strange. Were I fortunate enough to be Miss Prism's pupil, I would hang upon her lips. I spoke metaphorically. My metaphor was drawn from bees. But I must not disturb Egeria and her pupil any longer.
Egeria? My name is Letitia, Doctor.
A classical allusion, merely drawn from pagan authors.
I think, dear Doctor, I will have that stroll with you. I find I do have a headache after all. A walk might do it good.
With pleasure, Miss Prism, with pleasure.
That would be delightful. Cecily, you will read political economy in my absence.
Mr. Ernest Worthing has just driven over from the station. He has brought his luggage with him.
Mr. Ernest Worthing, Uncle Jack's brother? Did you tell him Mr. Worthing was in town?
Yes, miss. He seemed very much disappointed. I mentioned that you and Miss Prism were in the garden. He said he was anxious to speak to you privately for a moment.
Ask Mr. Ernest Worthing to come here.
Yes, miss.
I have never met any really wicked person before. I feel rather frightened. I'm so afraid he will look just like everyone else. He does.
You were little Cecily, I'm sure.
You are under some strange mistake. I am not little. In fact, I believe I am more than usually tall for my age. But I am Cecily. You, I see from your card, are Uncle Jack's brother, Ernest, wicked Ernest.
Oh, well, I'm not really wicked at all, Cecily. You mustn't think I'm wicked.
If you are not, then you are certainly been deceiving all of us in a very inexcusable manner. I hope you have not been leading a double life, pretending to be wicked and being really good all the time. That would be hypocrisy.
Well, in fact, now that you mention the subject, I have been very bad in my own small way.
I don't think you should be proud of that, though I am sure it must have been very pleasant.
It is much pleasanter being here with you.
I can't understand how you are here at all. Uncle Jack won't be back till Monday afternoon.
And that is a great disappointment. I'm obliged to go up by first train on Monday morning.
I think you'd better wait until Uncle Jack arrives. I know he wants to speak to you about your emigrating.
About my what?
Your emigrating? Uncle Jack is sending you to Australia.
Australia? I'd sooner die. The accounts I've received of Australia are not particularly encouraging. This world is good enough for me, Cecily.
Yes, but are you good enough for it?
I'm afraid I'm not that. That is why I want you to reform me. You might make it your mission if you don't mind, Cecily.
I'm afraid I've no time this afternoon.
Well, would you mind my reforming myself this afternoon?
I think you should try.
I will. I feel better already.
You are looking a little worse.
That is because I'm hungry.
How thoughtless of me. I should have remembered that when one is going to lead an entirely new life, one requires regular and wholesome meals. Won't you come in?
Thank you. Might I have a flower first? A pink rose?
Why?
Because you are like a pink rose, Cecily.
I don't think it can be right for you to talk to me like that. Miss Prism never says such things to me.
Then Miss Prism is a short-sighted old lady. You are the prettiest girl I ever saw.
Miss Prism says all good looks are a snare.
They are a snare that every sensible man would like to be caught in.
Oh, I don't think I would care to catch a sensible man. I should know what to talk to him about.
You are too much alone, dear doctor.
Well, the precept as well as the practice of the primitive church was distinctly against matrimony.
That is obviously the reason why the primitive church has not lasted up to present day. And you do not seem to realize, dear doctor, that by persistently remaining single, a man converts himself into a permanent public temptation. Men should be more careful. This very celibacy leads weaker vessels astray.
But is a man not equally attractive when married?
No man is ever attractive except to his wife.
And often, I've been told, not even to her.
That depends on the intellectual sympathies of the woman. Maturity can't be depended on. Ripeness can't be trusted. Young women are green. I speak horticulturally. My metaphor was drawn from fruits. But where is Cecily?
Perhaps she followed us.
Mr. Worthing!
Mr. Worthing?
This is indeed a pleasure. We did not look for you until Monday afternoon.
I have returned sooner than I expected. Dr. Chasuble, I hope you are well.
Dear Mr. Worthing, I trust this garb of woe does not betoken some terrible calamity.
My brother.
More shameful debts and extravagance.
Still leading his life of pleasure.
Dead.
Your brother Earnest dead.
Quite dead.
What a lesson for him. I trust he will profit by it.
Mr. Worthing, I offer you my sincere condolence. You have at least the consolation of knowing you were always the most generous and forgiving of brothers.
Poor Ernest. He had many faults, but it is a sad, sad blow.
Very sad indeed. Were you with him at the end?
No, he died abroad. In Paris, in fact. I had a telegram last night from the manager of the Grand Hotel.
And was the cause of death mentioned?
A severe chill, it seems.
As a man sows, so shall he reap.
Charity, dear Miss Prism, charity. None of us are perfect. I myself am peculiarly susceptible to drafts. Will this interment take place here?
No, he seems to have expressed a desire to be buried in Paris.
Paris? I feel that hardly points to any very serious state of mind at the last. You would no doubt wish me to make some allusion to this tragic domestic affliction next Sunday. My sermon on the meaning of the manna in the wilderness can be adapted to almost any occasion, joyful or, as in the present case, distressing. I have preached it at harvest celebrations, christenings, and confirmations.
You mentioned christenings, I think, Dr. Chasuble. I suppose you know how to christen all right.
But is there any particular infant in whom you are interested, Mr. Worthing? Your brother was, I believe, unmarried, was he not?
Oh, yes, but it is not for any child, dear doctor. No, the fact is I would like to be christened myself this afternoon if you have nothing better to do.
But surely, Mr. Worthing, you have been christened already?
I don't remember anything about it. Of course, I don't know if the thing would bother you in any way or if you think I'm too old now.
Oh, no, not at all. The sprinkling and indeed the immersion of adults is a perfectly canonical practice. At what hour do you wish the ceremony performed?
Oh, I might trot around 5:30, if that would suit you.
Perfectly. And now, my dear Mr. Worthing, I will not intrude any longer on this house of sorrow. I would merely beg you to not be too bowed down by the grief. What seem to us bitter trials are often blessings in disguise.
This seems to me a blessing of an extremely obvious kind.
Uncle Jack, oh, I'm so pleased to see you back. But what horrid clothes you've got on. Do go and change them.
Cecily!
My child, my child.
What is the matter, Uncle Jack? Do look happy. You look as if you had a toothache, and I've got such a surprise for you. Who do you think is in the dining room? Your brother.
Who?
Your brother, Ernest. He arrived about half an hour ago.
What nonsense! I haven't got a brother.
Oh, don't say that. However badly he may have behaved to you in the past, he is still your brother. You couldn't be so heartless as to disown him. I'll tell him to come out, and you will shake hands with him, won't you, Uncle Jack?
Well, these are very joyful tidings.
After we all had been resigned to his loss, his sudden return seems to be particularly distressing.
My brother is in the dining room. I don't know what it all means. I think it perfectly absurd. Oh, good heavens.
Brother John, I've come down from town to tell you that I'm very sorry for all the trouble I've given you and that I intend to lead a better life in the future.
I think his coming down here disgraceful. He knows perfectly well why.
Uncle Jack, do be nice. There is some good in everyone. Ernest has just been telling me about his poor invalid Mr. Bunbury, whom he goes to visit so often. And surely there must be good in someone who is kind to an invalid and leaves the pleasures of London to sit by a bed of pain.
Oh, he's been talking about Bunbury, has he?
Yes, he has told me all about poor Mr. Bunbury and his terrible state of health.
Of course, I admit that the faults were all on my side, but I must say that I think Brother John's coldness to me is particularly painful. I expected a more enthusiastic welcome, especially considering it is the first time I've come here.
Uncle Jack, if you don't shake hands with Ernest, I will never forgive you.
Never forgive me.
Never, never, never.
Well, this is the last time I shall ever do it.
It's pleasant, is it not, to see so perfect a reconciliation. I think we might leave the two brothers together.
Cecily, you will come with us.
Certainly, Miss Prism. My little task of reconciliation is over. I feel quite happy.
You young scoundrel, Algie. You must get out of this place as quickly as possible. I don't allow any Bunburying here. Merriman, order the dog cart at once. Mr. Ernest has suddenly been called back to town.
Yes, sir.
What a fearful liar you are, Jack. I've not been called back to town at all. I haven't heard anyone call me.
Your duty as a gentleman calls you back.
My duty as a gentleman has never interfered with my pleasure in the smallest degree. Well, Cecily is a darling.
You are not to talk of Miss Cardew like that. I don't like it.
Well, I don't like your clothes. You look perfectly ridiculous in them. Why on earth don't you go up and change? It's perfectly childish of you to be in deep mourning for a man who is actually staying for a whole week with you in your house as a guest. I call it grotesque.
You are certainly not staying with me for a whole week as a guest or anything else. You've got to leave by the 4:05 train.
Well, I certainly won't leave you so long as you are in mourning. It would be most unfriendly. If I were in mourning, you would stay with me, I suppose. I should think it very unkind if you didn't.
Well, will you go if I change my clothes?
Yes, if you're not too long. I never saw anybody take so long to dress and with such little result.
Your vanity is ridiculous, your conduct an outrage, and your presence in my garden utterly absurd. However, you have got to catch the 4:05, and I hope you have a pleasant journey back to town. This Bunburying, as you call it, has not been a great success for you.
I think it's been a great success. I'm in love with Cecily, and that is everything. But I must see her before I go and make arrangements for another Bunbury. Ah, there she is.
Oh, I merely came back to water the roses. I thought you were with Uncle Jack.
He's gone to order the dog cart for me. He's going to send me away.
Then we have got to part.
I'm afraid so. It's a very painful parting.
It is always painful to part from people whom one has known for a very brief space of time. The absence of old friends one can endure with equanimity, but even a momentary separation from anyone whom has just been introduced is almost unbearable.
The dog cart is at the door, sir.
It can wait, Merriman, for 5 minutes.
Yes, miss.
I hope, Cecily, that I shall not offend you if I state quite frankly and openly that you seem to me to be in every way the visible personification of absolute perfection.
I think your frankness does give you credit, Ernest. If you will allow me, I'll copy your remarks into my diary.
Do you really keep a diary? I'd give anything to look at it, may I?
Oh, no. You see, it is very simply a young girl's record of her own thoughts and impressions, and consequently meant for publication. But pray, Ernest, don't stop. I delight in taking down from any dictation. I have reached absolute perfection. Now go on, I am quite ready for more. Oh, don't cough, Ernest. When one is dictating, one should speak fluently and not cough. Besides, I don't know how to spell cough.
Cecily, ever since I first looked upon your wonderful and incomparable beauty, I have dared to love you wildly, passionately, devotedly, hopelessly.
I don't think you should tell me that you love me wildly, passionately, devotedly, hopelessly. Hopelessly doesn't make much sense now, does it?
Cecily.
The dog cart is waiting, sir.
Tell it to come round next week at the same hour.
Yes, miss. Yes, sir.
Uncle Jack would be very much annoyed if he knew you were staying on till next week at the same hour.
Oh, I don't care about Jack. I don't care for anybody in the whole world but you. I love you, Cecily. You will marry me, won't you?
You silly boy. Of course. Why, we've been engaged for the last 3 months.
For 3 months?
Yes, it will be exactly 3 months on Thursday.
But how did we become engaged?
Well, ever since dear Uncle Jack first confessed to us that he had a younger brother who was very wicked and bad, you, of course, have formed the chief topic of conversation between myself and Miss Prism. And of course, a man who is much talked about is always very attractive. One feels there must be something in him after all. I dare say it was foolish of me, but I fell in love with you, Ernest.
Darling, and when was the engagement settled?
On the 14th of February last, worn out by the entire ignorance of my existence, I determined to end the matter one way or another. And after a long struggle with myself, I accepted you. The next day, I bought this little ring in your name.
Oh, did I give you this? It's very pretty, isn't it?
Yes, you've wonderfully good taste, Ernest. It's the excuse I've always given for you leading such a bad life. And this is the box that I keep all of your letters.
My letters? But my own sweet Cecily, I've never written you any letters.
You need hardly remind me of that, Ernest. I remember only too well that I was forced to write letters for you. I wrote always 3 times a week, sometimes oftener.
Oh, do let me read them, Cecily.
Oh, I couldn't possibly. They would make you far too conceited. And the 3 you wrote me after we had broken off the engagement are so beautiful and so badly spelled. Even now, I can hardly read them without crying a little.
But was our engagement ever broken off?
Of course it was. On the 22nd of last March. You see the entry if you like. Today, I broke off my engagement with Ernest. I feel it better to do so. The weather continues charming.
But why on earth did you break it off? What had I done? I'd done nothing at all, Cecily. I'm very much hurt to hear you broke it off, particularly when the weather was so charming.
It would hardly have been a very serious engagement if I hadn't broken it off at least once. But I forgave you before the week was out.
What a perfect angel you are, Cecily.
You dear romantic boy.
You'll never break off our engagement again, Cecily?
I don't think I could break it off now that I've actually met you. Besides, of course, there is the question of your name.
Yes, of course.
You must not laugh at me, darling, but it has always been a girlish dream of mine to love someone whose name was Ernest. There is something in that name that inspires absolute confidence. I pity any poor married woman whose husband's name isn't Ernest.
But my dear, do you mean to say that you could not love me if I had some other name?
But what name?
Oh, any name you like. Algernon, for instance?
But I don't like the name Algernon.
Well, my own dear, sweet, loving little darling, I really can't see why you should object to the name of Algernon. It is not a bad name at all. In fact, it's rather aristocratic. But seriously, Cecily, if my name was Algie, couldn't you love me?
I might respect you, Ernest. I might admire your character, but I fear I should not be able to give you my undivided attention.
Cecily, your rector here is, I suppose, thoroughly experienced in the practices of all rites and ceremonials of the church?
Oh yes, Dr. Chasuble is a most learned man.
I must see him at once on an important christening. I mean, on a most important business. I shan't be away for more than half an hour.
Considering that we've been engaged since February the 14th, and I only met you today for the first time, I think it is rather hard that you should leave me for so long a period as half an hour. Couldn't you make it 20 minutes?
I'll be back in no time.
What an impetuous boy he is. I like his hair so much. I must enter his proposal in my diary.
Hey, Miss Fairfax has just called to see Mr. Worthing. On very important business, Miss Fairfax states.
Isn't Mr. Worthing in the library?
Mr. Worthing went over in the direction of the rectory some time ago.
Pray ask the lady to come here. Mr. Worthing is sure to be back soon, and you can bring tea.
Yes, miss.
Miss Fairfax, I suppose one of the many good elderly women who are associated with Uncle Jack in some philanthropic work in London.
Miss Fairfax.
Pray, let me introduce myself to you. My name is Cecily Cardew.
Cecily Cardew? Oh, what a very sweet name. Something tells me that we are going to be great friends. I like you already more than I can say. My first impressions of people are never wrong.
How nice of you to like me so much after we have known each other such a comparatively short time.
I may call you Cecily, may I not?
With pleasure.
And you will always call me Gwendolen, won't you?
If you wish.
Then that is all quite settled, is it not? You are here on a short visit, I suppose?
Oh no, I live here. My dear guardian, with the assistance of Miss Prism, has the arduous task of looking after me.
Your guardian?
Yes, I am Mr. Worthing's ward.
Oh, it is strange to me that he never mentioned he had a ward. I am not sure, however, that the news inspires me with feelings of unmixed delight. I am very fond of you, Cecily. I have liked you ever since I met you, but I am bound to state that now that I know that you are Mr. Worthing's ward, I cannot help but expressing a wish you were, well, just a little older than you seem to be, and not quite so very alluring in appearance. In fact, if I may speak candidly.
Pray do. I think that whenever one has anything unpleasant to say, one should always be quite candid.
Well, to speak with perfect candor, Cecily, I wish that you were fully 42 and more than usually plain for your age. Ernest has a strong, upright nature. He is the very soul of truth and honor. Disloyalty would be as impossible to him as deception. But even men of the noblest possible moral character are extremely susceptible to the influence of the physical charms of others.
I beg your pardon, Gwendolen. Did you say Ernest? Oh, but it is not Mr. Ernest Worthing who is my guardian. It is his brother, his elder brother.
Ernest never mentioned to me that he had a brother.
I'm sorry to say that they have not been on good terms for a very long time.
Ah, that accounts for it. And now that I think of it, I have never heard any man mention his brother. The subject seems distasteful to most men. Cecily, you have lifted a load from my mind. I was growing almost anxious. It would have been terrible if any cloud had come across a friendship like ours, would it not? Of course, you are quite sure that it is not Mr. Ernest Worthing who is your guardian?
Quite sure. In fact, I'm going to be his.
I beg your pardon?
Dearest Gwendolen, there is no reason why I should make it a secret to you. Mr. Ernest Worthing and I are engaged to be married.
I am afraid, my darling Cecily, I think there must be some slight error. Mr. Ernest Worthing is engaged to me.
I'm afraid you are under some misconception. Ernest proposed to me exactly 10 minutes ago.
It is certainly very curious, for he asked me to be his wife yesterday afternoon at 5:30. I am so sorry, dear Cecily, if it is any disappointment to you, but I am afraid that I have the prior claim.
It would distress me more than I can tell you, dear Gwendolen, if it caused you any mental or physical anguish. But I feel bound to point out that since Ernest proposed to you, he clearly has changed his mind.
If the poor fellow has been entrapped into any foolish promise, I shall consider it my duty to rescue him at once, and with a firm hand.
Whatever unfortunate entanglement my dear boy may have gotten into, I will never reproach him with it after we are married.
Do you allude to me, Miss Cardew, as an entanglement? You are presumptuous. On an occasion of this kind, it becomes more than a moral duty to speak one's mind. It becomes a pleasure.
Do you suggest, Miss Fairfax, that I entrapped Ernest into an engagement? How dare you? This is no time for wearing the shallow mask of manners. When I see a spade, I call it a spade.
Oh, I'm glad to say I have never seen a spade. It is obvious that our social spheres are widely different.
Shall I lay tea here as usual, miss?
Yes, as usual.
Quite a well-kept garden here, Miss Cardew.
So glad you like it, Miss Fairfax.
I had no idea there were any flowers in the country. Personally, I cannot understand how anybody manages to exist in the country, if anybody who is anybody does. The country always bores me to death.
May I offer you some tea, Miss Fairfax?
Thank you. Detestable girl. But I require tea.
Sugar?
No, thank you. Sugar is not fashionable anymore.
Here you are.
You have filled my tea with lumps of sugar. I am known for the gentleness of my disposition and the extraordinary sweetness of my nature, but I warn you, Miss Cardew, you may go too far. From the very moment I saw you, I distrusted you. I felt that you were false and deceitful. I am never deceived in such matters. My first impressions of people are invariably right.
It seems to me, Miss Fairfax, that I am trespassing on your valuable time. No doubt you have many other calls of a similar character to make in the neighborhood.
Ernest! My own Ernest!
Gwendolen, darling.
A moment. May I ask if you are engaged to be married to Cecily?
To dear little Cecily? Well, of course not. What could have put such an idea into your pretty little head?
Thank you.
I knew there must have been some misunderstanding, Miss Fairfax. That gentleman is my guardian, Mr. John Worthing.
I beg your pardon?
This is Uncle Jack.
Jack? Oh,
Here is Ernest.
My own love.
A moment, Ernest. May I ask you, are you engaged to be married to Gwendolen?
Good heavens, Gwendolen!
Yes, to good heavens, Gwendolen. I mean to Gwendolen.
Of course not. What would put such a strange idea in your pretty little head?
Thank you.
I felt there was some slight error, Miss Cardew. This gentleman is my cousin, Mr. Algernon Moncrieff.
Algernon Moncrieff. Oh. Are you called Algernon?
I cannot deny it.
Oh.
Is your name really John?
I could deny it if I liked. I could deny anything if I liked, but my name is certainly John. It has been John for years.
Gwendolen, a gross deception has been practiced on both of us.
My poor wounded Cecily.
My sweet wronged Gwendolen.
Cecily, you will call me sister, will you not?
There is just one question I would like to be allowed to ask my guardian.
An admirable idea. Mr. Worthing, there is just one question I would like to be permitted to put to you. Where is your brother Ernest? We are both engaged to be married to your brother Ernest. So it is a matter of some importance to us to know where your brother Ernest is at present.
Gwendolen, Cecily, it is very painful for me to be forced to speak the truth. I'm really quite inexperienced of doing anything of the kind. However, I will tell you quite frankly that I have no brother Ernest. I have no brother at all. I never had a brother in my life, and I certainly have not the smallest intention of having one in the future.
No brother at all?
Had you never a brother of any kind?
Never. Not even of any kind.
I'm afraid it is quite clear, Cecily, that neither of us is engaged to be married to anyone. Let us go into the house. They will hardly venture to follow us there.
No, men are so cowardly, aren't they?
This ghastly state of affairs is what you call bunburying, I suppose?
Yes, and a wonderfully perfect bunbury it is. The most wonderful bunbury I think I ever had in my life.
Well, you've no right whatsoever to bunbury here.
That's absurd. One has a right to bunbury anyone where one chooses. Every serious bunburyist knows that.
Serious bunburyist, good heavens.
Well, one has to be serious about something if one wants to have any amusement in life. I happen to be serious about bunburying. What on earth you are serious about, I haven't the faintest idea. About everything, I should fancy. You are so absolutely trivial in nature.
Well, the only small satisfaction I have in the whole of this wretched business is that your friend Bunbury is quite exploded. You won't be able to run down to the country quite so often as you used to do, dear Algie. And a very good thing, too.
Your brother is a little off color, isn't he, dear Jack? You won't be able to disappear to London quite so frequently as your wicked custom was. And not a bad thing either.
And as for your conduct towards Miss Cardew, I must say that your taking in a sweet, simple, innocent girl like that is quite inexcusable, to say nothing of the fact that she is my ward.
I can see no possible defense at all for you deceiving a brilliant, clever, thoroughly experienced young lady as Miss Fairfax, to say nothing of the fact that she's my cousin.
I wanted to be engaged to Gwendolen. That is all. I love her.
Well, I simply wanted to be engaged to Cecily. I adore her.
There's certainly no chance of your marrying Miss Cardew.
I don't think there's much likelihood, Jack, of you and Miss Fairfax being united.
Well, that is no business of yours.
If it was my business, I wouldn't talk about it. It is very vulgar to talk about one's business.
How can you sit there, calmly eating muffins while we are in this horrible trouble? I can't make out. You seem to me to be perfectly heartless.
Well, I can't eat muffins in an agitated manner. The butter would probably get all over my cuffs. One should always eat muffins quite calmly. It is the only way to eat them.
I say it's perfectly heartless you're eating muffins at all under the circumstances.
When I'm in trouble, eating is the only thing that consoles me. Indeed, when I'm really in great trouble, as one who would intimately know me, I refuse everything except food and drink. At the present moment, I'm eating muffins because I am unhappy. Besides, I'm particularly fond of muffins.
Well, that is no reason why you should eat them in that greedy way.
I wish you would have tea cakes instead. I really don't like tea cakes.
Good heavens! I suppose a man may eat his own muffins in his own garden?
But you have just said it's perfectly heartless to eat muffins.
I said it was perfectly heartless of you under the circumstances. That is a very different thing.
That may be, but the muffins are all the same.
Algy, I wish to goodness you would go.
You can't possibly ask me to go without having some dinner. It's absurd. I never go anywhere without dinner. No one ever does, except vegetarians and people like that. Besides, I've just made arrangements with Dr. Chasuble to be christened at 5:45 under the name of Earnest.
My dear fellow, the sooner you give up that nonsense, the better. I made arrangements this morning with Dr. Chasuble to be christened myself at 5:30. And naturally, I will take the name of Ernest. Gwendolen would wish it. We can't both have the name Ernest. We can't both be christened Ernest. It's absurd. Besides, I have a perfect right to be christened if I like. There's no evidence at all that I've ever been christened by anybody, and I think it extremely probable that I never was. So does Dr. Chasuble. It's entirely different in your case. You have been christened already.
Yes, but I haven't been christened in years.
Yes, but you have been christened. That is the important thing.
Quite so. So I know my constitution can stand it. If you are not quite sure about ever being christened, I must say, I think it rather dangerous you're venturing on it now. That might make you very unwell. You can hardly have forgotten that someone very closely connected to you was nearly carried off by a severe chill in Paris this week.
Yes, but you yourself said that a severe chill was not hereditary.
Oh, it used to be, I know, but I dare say it is now. Science is always making wonderful improvements in things.
Oh, that is nonsense. You're always talking nonsense.
Jack, you're at the muffins again. I wish you wouldn't. There are only 2 left. I told you I was very fond of muffins.
But I hate tea cake.
Why on earth do you allow tea cakes to be served to guests? What ideas you have on hospitality.
Algernon, I have already told you to go. I don't want you here. Why don't you go?
Well, I haven't quite finished my tea, and there is 1 muffin left.
The fact that they did not follow us at once into the house, as anyone else would have done, seems to me to show that they have some sense of shame left. They don't seem to notice us at all. Couldn't you cough?
But I haven't got a cough.
They're looking at us. What effrontery.
They're approaching. That's very forward of them.
Let us preserve a dignified silence.
Certainly, it's the only thing to do now.
We will not be the first to speak.
Certainly not.
Mr. Worthing, I have something very particular to ask you. Much depends upon your reply.
Gwendolen, your common sense is invaluable. Mr. Moncrieff, kindly answer me the following question. Why did you pretend to be my guardian's brother?
In order that I might have an opportunity of meeting you.
That seems certainly satisfactory. Explanation, does it not?
Yes, dear, if you can believe him.
I don't. But that does not affect the wonderful beauty of his answer.
True. In matters of grave importance, style, not sincerity, is the vital thing. Mr. Worthing, what explanation can you offer to me for pretending to have a brother? Was it in order that you might have an opportunity of coming up to town to see me as often as possible?
Can you doubt it, Miss Fairfax?
I have the gravest doubts upon the subject, but I intend to crush them. Their explanations appear to be quite satisfactory, especially Mr. Worthing's. That seems to have the stamp of truth upon it.
I am more than content with what Mr. Moncrieff said.
Then you think we should forgive them?
Yes. I mean, no.
True. I had forgotten. There are principles at stake that one cannot surrender. Which one of us should tell them? The task is not a pleasant one.
Could we not both speak at the same time?
An excellent idea. I nearly always speak at the same time as other people. Will you take the time from me?
Certainly.
Your Christian names are still an insuperable barrier. That is all.
That is all.
Our Christian names. Is that all? But we are going to be christened this afternoon.
Jack, for my sake, you are prepared to do this terrible thing?
I am.
Algernon, to please me, you are ready to face this fearful ordeal.
I am.
How absurd to talk of the equality of the sexes. Where questions of self-sacrifice are concerned, men are infinitely beyond us.
We are.
Darling Jack.
Cecily, darling.
Lady Bracknell.
Oh. Good heavens.
Gwendolen, what does this mean?
Merely that I am engaged to be married to Mr. Worthing, Mamma.
Apprised, sir, of my daughter's sudden flight by her trusty maid, whose confidence I purchased by means of a small coin, I followed her at once by luggage train. But of course you will clearly understand that all communication between yourself and my daughter must cease immediately from this moment. On this point, as on all points, I am firm.
I am engaged to be married to Gwendolen, Lady Bracknell.
You are nothing of the kind, sir. And now as regards Algernon. Algernon?
Yes, Aunt Augusta.
May I ask if it is in this house that your invalid friend, Mr. Bunbury, resides?
Oh, no. Bunbury doesn't live here. Bunbury is somewhere else at present. In fact, he's dead.
Dead? When did Mr. Bunbury die? His death must have been extremely sudden.
I killed him this afternoon. I mean, poor Bunbury died this afternoon.
What did he die of?
Bunbury? Oh, he quite exploded.
Exploded? Was he the victim of some revolutionary outrage?
My dear Aunt Augusta, I mean, he was found out. The doctors found out that Bunbury could not live. That is what I mean. So Bunbury died.
He seems to have had great confidence in the opinion of his physicians. I am glad, however, that he made up his mind at the last to some definite course of action and acted under proper medical advice. And now that we have finally got rid of Mr. Bunbury, may I ask, Mr. Worthing, who is that young person whose hand my nephew Algernon is holding in what seems to me a particularly unnecessary manner?
That lady is Miss Cecily Cardew, my ward.
I'm engaged to be married to Cecily, Aunt Augusta.
I beg your pardon?
Mr. Moncrieff and I are engaged to be married, Lady Bracknell.
I do not know whether there is anything particularly exciting in the air of this particular part of Hertfordshire, but the number of engagements that go on seems to me considerably above the proper average that statistics lay down for our guidance. I think some preliminary inquiry on my part would not be out of place. Mr. Worthing, is Miss Cardew at all connected with any of the larger railway stations in London? I merely desire information. Until yesterday, I had no idea that there were any families or persons whose origin was a terminus.
Miss Cardew is the granddaughter of the late Mr. Thomas Cardew.
So far, I am satisfied.
How extremely kind of you, Lady Bracknell. I also have in my possession, you will be pleased to hear, certificates of Miss Cardew's birth, baptism, whooping cough, registration, vaccination, confirmation, and the measles, both the German and the English variety.
Ah, a life crowded with incident, I see, although perhaps somewhat too exciting for a young girl. I am not myself in favor of premature experiences. As a matter of form, Mr. Worthing, I had better ask you if Miss Cardew has any little fortune?
Oh, about £130,000. That is all. Goodbye, Lady Bracknell. I'm pleased to have seen you.
A moment, Mr. Worthing. £130,000. Miss Cardew seems a most attractive young lady now that I look at her. Few girls of the present day have any really solid qualities, any of the qualities that last and improve with time. We live, I regret to say, in an age of surfaces. Pretty child, your dress is sadly simple and your hair is almost as nature left it, but we can soon alter that. There are distinct social possibilities in your profile. The two weak points of our age are its want of principle and its want of profile. The chin a little higher, dear. Style largely depends upon the way the chin is worn. They are worn quite high at present. Algernon.
Yes, Aunt Augusta.
There are distinct possibilities in Miss Cardew's profile.
Cecily is the sweetest, dearest, prettiest girl in the whole world, and I don't care 2 pence about social possibilities.
Never speak disrespectfully of society, Algernon. Only people who can't get into it do that. Dear child, of course you know that Algernon has nothing but his debts to depend upon. Well, I suppose I must give my consent.
Thank you, Aunt Augusta.
Thank you, Lady Bracknell.
The marriage, I think, had better take place quite soon. To speak frankly, I am not in favor of long engagements. They give people the opportunity of finding out each other's character before marriage, which I think is never advisable.
I beg your pardon for interrupting you, Lady Bracknell, but this engagement is quite out of the question. I am Miss Cardew's guardian, and she cannot marry without my consent until she comes of age. And that consent I absolutely decline to give.
Upon what grounds, may I ask? Algernon is an extremely, I might almost say ostentatiously, eligible young man. He has nothing, but he looks everything. What more can one desire?
It pains me very much to have to speak frankly, Lady Bracknell, to you about your nephew, but the fact is that I do not approve of his moral character. I suspect him of being untruthful.
Untruthful? My nephew, Algernon? Impossible.
I fear there can be no possible doubt about the matter. This afternoon, during my temporary absence in London on an important mission of romance, he obtained admission to my house by means of the false pretense of being my brother. Continuing his disgraceful deception, he succeeded in the course of the afternoon of alienating the affections of my only ward. And what makes his conduct all the more heartless is that he was perfectly well aware from the first that I have no brother, that I have never had a brother, and that I don't intend to have a brother, not even of any kind. I distinctly told him so myself yesterday afternoon.
Mr. Worthing, after careful consideration, I have decided entirely to overlook my nephew's conduct to you.
Well, that's very generous of you, Lady Bracknell. My own decision, however, is unalterable. I decline to give my consent.
Cecily, how old are you, dear?
Well, I'm really only 18, but I always admit to 20 when I go to evening parties.
Well, it will not be very long before you are of age and free from the restraints of tutelage. So I don't think your guardian's consent is, after all, a matter of any importance.
Pray, excuse me, Lady Bracknell, for interrupting you again, but it is only fair to tell you that according to the terms of her grandfather's will, Miss Cardew does not legally come of age until she is 35.
That does not seem to me to be a grave objection. 35 is a very attractive age. London society is full of women of the very highest birth who have of their own free choice remained 35 for years. I see no reason why our own dear Cecily should not be even still more attractive at the age you mentioned than she is at present.
Algie, could you wait for me till I was 35?
Of course I could, Cecily. You know I could.
Yes, I felt it instinctively, but I couldn't wait all that time. I hate waiting, even 5 minutes, for anybody.
Then what is to be done, Cecily?
I don't know, Mr. Moncrieff.
My dear Mr. Worthing, as Miss Cardew states positively that she cannot wait until she is 35, I would beg of you to reconsider your decision.
But, my dear Lady Bracknell, the matter is entirely in your own hands. The moment you consent to my marriage with Gwendolen, I will most gladly allow your nephew to form an alliance with my ward.
You must be quite aware that that is out of the question.
Then a passionate celibacy is all that any of us can look forward to.
That is not the destiny I propose for Gwendolen. Algernon, of course, can choose for himself.
Everything is quite ready for the christenings.
The christening, sir, is that not somewhat premature?
Both of these gentlemen have expressed a desire for immediate baptism.
At their age, the idea is grotesque and irreligious. Algernon, I forbid you to be baptized.
Am I to understand that there is to be no christenings at all this afternoon?
I don't think that as things are now, it would be of much practical value to either of us, Dr. Chasuble.
I'm grieved to hear such sentiments from you, Mr. Worthing. I will return to the church at once. Indeed, I've just been informed that for the last hour and a half, Miss Prism has been waiting for me in the vestry.
Miss Prism? Did I hear you mention a Miss Prism?
Yes, Lady Bracknell.
Pray allow me to detain you for a moment. This matter may prove to be one of vital importance. Is this Miss Prism a female of repellent aspect, remotely connected with education?
She is the most cultivated of ladies, and the very picture of respectability.
It is obviously the same person. May I ask what position she holds in your household?
I am a celibate, madam.
Miss Prism, Lady Bracknell, has been for the last 3 years Miss Cardew's esteemed governess and valued companion.
In spite of what I hear of her, I must see her at once. Let her be sent for.
She approaches. She is nigh.
I was told you expected me in the vestry, dear Canon. I have been waiting for you there for an hour and 3/4.
Prism! Come here, Prism. Prism, where is that baby? 28 years ago, Prism, you left Lord Bracknell's house, number 104 Upper Grosvenor Street, in charge of a stroller that contained a baby of the male sex. You never returned. A few weeks later, through the elaborate investigations of the Metropolitan Police, the stroller was discovered at midnight, standing by itself in a remote corner of London. It contained the manuscript of a 3-volume novel of more than usually revolting sentimentality. But the baby was not there. Prism, where is that baby?
Lady Bracknell, I admit with shame that I do not know. I only wish I did. The plain facts of the case are these. On the morning of the day that you mention, a day that I will forever be branded in my memory, I prepared as usual to take the baby out in its stroller. I also had with me a somewhat old but capricious handbag in which I had intended to place the manuscript of a work of fiction that I had written during my few unoccupied hours. In a moment of mental abstraction, for which I can never forgive myself, I deposited the manuscript in the stroller and placed the baby in the handbag.
But where did you deposit the handbag?
Do not ask me, Mr. Worthing.
Miss Prism, this is a matter of no small importance to me. I insist on knowing where you deposited the handbag that contained that infant.
I left it in the cloakroom of one of the larger railway stations in London.
What railway station?
Victoria, the Brighton line.
Miss Prism, I was the baby you placed in the handbag.
You?
Yes, Mother.
Mr. Worthing, I am unmarried.
Unmarried? I do not deny that that is a serious blow. But after all, who has the right to cast a stone against one who has suffered? Cannot repentance wipe out an act of folly? Why should there be one law for men and another for women? Mother, I forgive you.
Mr. Worthing, there is some error. Lady Bracknell can tell you who you really are.
Lady Bracknell, I hate to seem inquisitive, but would you kindly inform me who I am?
I am afraid that the news I have to give you will not altogether please you. You are the son of my poor sister, Mrs. Moncrieff, and consequently Algernon's elder brother.
Algy's elder brother! Well, then I have a brother after all. Oh, I knew I had a brother. Algy, you young scoundrel, you will have to treat me with more respect in the future. You've never behaved to me like a brother in all your life.
Well, not till today, old boy, I admit. I did my best, however, though I was out of practice.
My own! But what own are you? What is your Christian name, now that you have become someone else?
Good heavens, I'd quite forgotten that point. Your decision on the subject of my name is irrevocable, I suppose.
Oh, I never change, except in my affections.
Oh, then the question had better be cleared up at once. Aunt Augusta, a moment. At the time when Miss Prism left me in the handbag, had I been christened already?
Every luxury money could buy, including christening, had been lavished upon you by your fond and doting parents.
Then I was christened. Oh, that is settled. Well, then now, what name was I given? Let me know the worst.
Being the eldest son, you were naturally christened after your father.
Yes, but what was my father's Christian name?
I cannot at the present moment recall what the general's Christian name was, but I have no doubt he had one.
Algy, can't you recollect what our father's Christian name was?
My dear boy, we were never on speaking terms. He died before I was a year old.
His name would appear in the army lists of the period, I suppose, Aunt Augusta.
I have no doubt his name would appear in any military directory.
Well, the army lists of the last 40 years are here. Oh, these delightful selections, these records should have been my constant study. No, generals, Malum, Maxbaum, Magley. Oh, what ghastly names they have. Migsby, Moncrieff, Lieutenant 1840, Captain, Lieutenant Colonel, Colonel General 1869, Christian names, Ernest John. I always told you, Gwendolen, that my name was Ernest, didn't I? Well, it is Ernest after all. I mean, naturally, it is Ernest. I was named Ernest John.
Yes, I remember now that the general was called Ernest. I knew I had some reason for particularly disliking the name.
Ernest, my own Ernest. I felt from the first that you could have no other name.
Gwendolen, it is a terrible thing for a man to find out that suddenly all his life he's been speaking nothing but the truth. Can you forgive me?
I can, for I feel certain you are about to change.
My own Gwendolen.
My own Letitia.
Frederick at last.
Cecily at last.
Gwendolen at last.
My nephew, you seem to be displaying signs of triviality.
On the contrary, Aunt Augusta, I've now realized for the first time in my life the vital importance of being earnest.
Thank you for attending tonight's performance. For our curtain call, we have Jan Bahner playing Lady Bracknell, Richard Bahner playing Merriman, Chris Clark playing John Worthing, Lucy Lemke Clark playing Gwendolen Fairfax, Brad Henderson playing the Reverend Dr. Chasuble, Carl Hucherson playing Lane, Tyler Kempton playing Cecily Cardew, Jeromy Layman playing Algernon Moncrieff, and Melissa Turner playing Mrs. Prism. Thank you very much for watching tonight. If you enjoyed tonight's performance, please consider making a donation to Liberty Center Association for the Arts and watch our social media for our next performance. Have a good night.